All right, I think we have quorum and we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for your patience. I apologize for the delay. Welcome to the Sustainable Communities Working Group. The chair for this committee is actually Supervisor Lawson Reamer, but she was unable to attend today's meeting, so I'll be covering for her today. I'm Antoinette Meyer. I'm the Director of Planning here at SANDAG. I'm going to be chairing the meeting until about 2:45, and then I have to head out, and Tweri will pick things up for me at that point, and we'll chair the rest of the meeting if we're still going. I think most of you have been here before, but just in case you don't remember, that we have restrooms out the door here, past the elevators and to the right. And if you didn't get your parking validated when you came in, you can visit reception on the 8th floor and they will validate your parking for you. Hopefully, if you did park today, you parked in the building. If you didn't know that in the future, you should, because we'll cover the cost of the parking while you're here for the meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Tessa to officially perform roll call and confirm that we have a quorum.
Good afternoon. I'll do roll call first. City of Carlsbad, Jeff Murphy.
Here.
City of Chula Vista, Todd Phillips.
Here.
City of Coronado, Jane Thornton.
Here.
County of San Diego, Lynette Tessitore.
Here.
City of Del Mar is absent. City of El Cajon is absent. City of Encinitas, Crystal Najira.
Here.
City of Escondido, Adam Feinstone.
Here.
City of Imperial Beach, Tyler Foltz.
Here.
City of La Mesa is absent. City of Lemon Grove is absent. And City of National City is absent. City of Oceanside, Sergio Madeira.
Here.
City of Poway is absent. City of San Diego is absent. City of San Marcos is absent. City of Santee, Michael Coyne. City of Solana Beach, Joseph Lim.
Present.
And City of Vista is absent. And then for advisory members, Air Pollution Control District, Kathy Kian.
Present.
And San Diego Regional Airport Authority, Ralph Redman.
Present.
And we did have one more member come in while I was calling roll call. If she could introduce herself, that'd be great. Karen Brindley, City of Del Mar. Oh, City of Del Mar, Karen Brindley. And that does confirm a quorum.
Thank you, Tessa. Before we begin with the agenda items, I'd like to review the meeting process for both members of the working group and members of the public who wish to participate. Tessa, can you provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work? And for working group members, if you just raise your hand, I'll call on you.
Thank you, Chair. If you're a member of the public in the room in person and would like to provide comments on any item, please see me to complete a speaker slip prior to the start of the item. If you're joining us on Zoom as a member of the public and want to speak on any item, please raise your virtual hand once the item begins. We will call on members of the public that are in person first, followed by the virtual commenters who will be referred to by either your name or the last 3 digits of your telephone number. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Do any members of the working group have questions before we continue on with the agenda? Okay, I wanted to let you all know about a little technical glitch. Normally, you would have the ability to open links in the iPads that have the materials pre-downloaded. SANDAG launched a new website over the weekend, and unfortunately, the materials were loaded and the links no longer work with the new website. So we will be sending out all of the materials to members. So my apologies for that little glitch, but the new website is beautiful. I don't know if you used the old website much. It wasn't very usable. This one is a little bit more user-friendly and easier to find content. And you may not be able to find everything right now. It's a bit of a process to get all of the content loaded in, but it is a huge improvement over what we had previously. Okay, before we get into the agenda items, let's go around the table for introductions of the working group members that we have today. And I'll start to my left, which is not a working group member, but a staff person at SANDAG.
Good afternoon. Tuere Faola, and I manage SANDAG's Sustainable Communities team, which is in the Regional Planning Department.
Jeff Murphy, Community Development Director for the City of Carlsbad.
Todd Phillips, Planning Manager for the City of Chula Vista. Jane Thornton, planner at the City of Coronado.
Lynette Tessitore, Chief of Long Range Planning, County of San Diego.
Karen Brindley, Planning and Community Development Director, City of Del Mar.
Crystal Nahara, City of Encinitas. I'm the Sustainability Manager.
Adam Feinstein, City Planner, City of Escondido.
Tyler Foltz, Deputy City Manager and Community Development Director, Imperial Beach.
Kathy Keehan, I manage the planning, incentives, and rural development teams at the Air Pollution Control District.
Ralph Redmond, Manager Airport Planning at the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority.
Joe Lim, City of Solana Beach Community Development Director.
Michael Coyne, City of Santee Planning Department.
Sergio Madera, City Planner, City of Oceanside.
All right, thank you. So not only did we have a glitch with the items on the agenda, but apparently we posted the incorrect date for the next Sustainable Communities Working Group meeting in your agenda. So I just wanted to clarify that the next meeting is actually scheduled for Thursday, January 19th at 1:30 p.m. So now we'll move on to non-agenda public comments. Tessa, do we have any public comments?
I have one in-person, non-agenda public comment. Mr. Blair Beekman, please come to the podium.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. This is one of my first public meetings at Sandag. I introduced myself last month to yourselves. I'm from San Francisco Bay Area, moved down here. There's a whole new world opening and developing around the future of openness and accountability with the future of technology projects, surveillance and data collection in a community. It's ACLU work initially, but it asks us to come up with our own ideas and our own ways of developing a future of openness and community practices where the community can be involved in the process of how technology is deployed in the future of our community. Sandag announced here at their board of directors last meeting and in the city of San Diego both that you have new hopeful projects about the future of internet service, expanding broadband and wanting to bridge digital divide issues with this expansion. This is also going to mean you're going to want to put in a bunch of new technology into local communities, 5G and other forms of broadband, that has a tendency to just kind of bulldoze over public opinion and public questions if it should be placed in their neighborhood or not. I appreciate the concepts of streamlining from 2015, why that happened in 2015, the new concepts of streamlining. I respect it, but I think we have to really work on a way that there has to be more of a public community partnership in understanding what bridging the digital divide means. It's not just dumping in a bunch of tech into an area. It is how do we have open, accountable practices in placing that tech. That is our democratic future. It's not just government handing down dictates to the community, what is our better future? We have a process we have to work out. Up in the SF Bay Area, San Jose, I say this all the time in the Bay Area, and they're learning the concepts of, when they want to place the technology in local communities, they work with the broadband installers, to make sure that they have an open notification process, that it's clear and accessible and understandable, and that the public has, say, a 21-day period at least to have an appeal time to that process. And for neighborhood associations to be allowed to better introduce what is coming down the pipe with these sort of practices, so neighborhood communities can then have input and feedback on how to best place this technology in the future. So, I'm new at this. I'm trying to learn how these better practices work to be really open and accessible with the broadband companies installing this future internet service you're trying to work towards. It's vitally important to learn how to do. We don't know how to do that yet, really. Good luck on how to practice that. Thanks.
There are no further public comments on this item.
Okay, next we have a couple of agency updates from Carrie Simmons, who is a planner on our Sustainable Communities team.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carrie Simmons. Like Antoinette said, I'm a regional planner on the Sustainable Communities team. I'm going to share a couple announcements before I start. I wanted to give a quick shout out and congratulations to the City of Vista, the City of El Cajon, and the City of Chula Vista, who now all have certified housing elements and are in full compliance with HCD, which is a huge accomplishment. So congratulations. Okay, so I first want to announce and invite all of you guys to an upcoming joint working group forum that SANDAG will be hosting. The forum is going to be held on February 9th from 10 to 12 at the downtown library. The topic of this forum is really to kick off the 2025 regional plan update, which we're all really excited to do. It's going to be made up of a couple different SANDAG working groups and you guys included. We're really excited to kick this off and you'll be hearing more information about this in the near future and some calendar holds. And the other update I want to share is to share a brief update on some great work that's been coming out of the Series 15 task force. I also want to say thank you to all of you who have been participating in it. We've heard a lot of good feedback and had a lot of good discussions on getting data and kind of getting some input on our future criteria that we're going to be using in our modeling forecasting. We've really dove into how we're going to estimate ADUs in the baseline and our future scenarios. We're also going to have been talking about some development constraints that we'll be considering. With that, I want to announce that we're going to be sharing a summary of sort of all of what we've been discussing and send it out to all the jurisdictions to try to get even more feedback from all of you guys. And kind of give you something more deeply to look at. We'll also be presenting more of a full presentation on Series 15 at the next task force meeting in January, so look forward to that. And finally, if anyone is interested in participating in the task force, we're gonna have our next meeting in January on the 11th from 9 to 11. So if you wanna get even more involved and dive more into these details, please reach out to me and we can get you in on the task force meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Do any members have comments or announcements from your jurisdictions that you'd like to share? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to item 2, which is approval of the meeting minutes. If there aren't any questions or comments on the September 15th minutes, I would request a motion to approve.
So moved.
I would just like to confirm that for the record, there are no public comments on this item.
Thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Tessa. All right, we had a motion from Chula Vista.
Second.
And a second from Imperial Beach. The clerk will now call for a hand raised vote.
Yes, all those in favor, yes, please raise your hands. Any noes, raise your hands. Any abstentions? Thank you. That item passes with 2 abstentions, and the balance of the attendees are yes.
Next up then is item number 3, which is a topic that we've been talking a lot about lately, that is the Regional Early Action Program, or REAP 2.0. As you may recall, SANDAG is the recipient of about $43 million through REAP 2.0, and a large portion of that funding we're sub-allocating to all of you through a competitive process. So Tueri is going to provide an update on the REAP 2.0 application that we're submitting to the state to be able to draw down those funds, and then the eligibility and evaluation criteria for our upcoming call for projects.
Okay, thank you, Antoinette. So Allison and Stacy, who were on the agenda, unfortunately are not able to be here with you, so you get me to talk about the program with you. So as Antoinette said, I really just want to take the time. It's a little bit of 2 parts of the presentation. The first part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on what is going in our application. We are asking the board tomorrow to approve a resolution allowing us to apply for the funds. And just a quick reminder, the application that we're submitting for the Regional Early Action Planning Grants, REAP, will be due at the end of this year. So I also just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who has been participating and giving us feedback and comments. We had a survey that was open, and I believe we had over 500 comments submitted, surveys completed to help inform what we are doing with the proposed uses in the application, as well as I know a lot of you participated in our housing forum that we had and have just been having a lot of different conversations to help us to shape this program. So let me move on. So few things just to remind you, the Regional Early Action Planning Grants, REAP 2.0, does have several objectives that the state has put forward that we need to meet with our application and any of the projects that are subrecipients of it. Those primary objectives are accelerating infill development, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and reducing vehicles miles travel. So one of the things that we've been doing as we've been developing the REAP program and really kind of defining what SANDAG's role is in terms of housing and where we are as a regional housing leader is we took some time with the REAP 1.0 grants to really survey the jurisdictions, working with your counterparts and some of you to talk about what are the needs around how SANDAG can help support housing in the region. And so the three things that we really see as being areas for opportunity for SANDAG to support is around local jurisdiction support. You know, that can be through the grant programs, through some technical assistance programs that we're hoping to begin offering to you, and then also really providing streamlined data analysis and policy resources. There's a lot of opportunity for us to provide some of the data and do it in a streamlined fashion so that it's equal and available to all jurisdictions. And then regional initiatives. So we've been putting forth some different programs related to education and outreach. We did a Housing Policy Leadership Academy. We've been doing housing forums on that. And so we're just looking at how we can be a leader in supporting those initiatives, as well as working with the development community to bring more funding and grants to our region to support housing. And so we kind of wrap that all up into what we were calling our Housing Acceleration Program strategy. So here is just a bit of a timeline just to let you know where we're at within the REAP program. You know, this has been going on, and as Antoinette said, we've been talking to you for a while about it, but the program development really began in February 2022. Many of you participated in a working group joint forum that we did on this, and then the draft guidelines came out from the state shortly after in the summer. And then once we had the draft guidelines, kind of understood all of the parameters and where the funding was specifically coming from, we pulled together initial ideas on what we wanted to do with the funds and put that into what we called the REAP 2.0 framework and made that publicly available for review and comment. And that was supplemented by the survey that I mentioned earlier that everyone participated in. And now we're working very much towards meeting the end of the year deadline, which is to submit our application to the state by December 31st. We hope to do that sooner because that's a Saturday. But then the other two important deadlines to just kind of keep in mind is that right now the expectation is that we'll hear feedback from the state on our application and any things that they may have in terms of questions or proposed changes by March. And so that's where we're anticipating the approval, and we have until 2026 as the legislative deadline, June 2026, to be able to expend the funds and submit all of our final reporting. So for where we have proposed SANDAG's program priorities, we see this, you know, really also syncing up with our efforts around the regional plan, our sustainable community strategy, and our commitment to equity. We think that that falls in line with what we think are what the state has identified as their program priorities. And so, you know, as I mentioned before, we had the areas where we've identified where SANDAG's role could be as a regional leader, but these four program categories that you see here, from local jurisdiction support, supporting developers and transit agencies, as well as establishing regional partnerships, that is how we're proposing and seeing the program priorities within REAP 2.0 unfold. And so some of the things that we've highlighted here under local jurisdictions is really helping to accelerate infill housing and implement those housing elements and getting them across the finish line. We're also looking at how we can support developers and some of, you know, the transformative projects that they're proposing to do, and really working with our transit agencies, and then looking for creative and new opportunities to develop regional partnerships to advance our shared goals for housing and climate. So here is the four program priority overview or the proposed uses. I'm going to go through each one really quickly just so you can kind of see the funding breakdown. So on this next slide here, this explains out of SANDAG's allocation, and I probably should have mentioned that early on, our allocation for our region is approximately $43 million. And so you can see here how we're breaking down that. A portion of it is for administrative cost that helps us to administer some of the grants and the program development. The state also, and that's in the blue, the state also has a requirement as part of the program that we needed to have outreach and engagement as part of the program. And so up to 10% of our application was supposed to support administration as well as outreach and engagement, which you can see highlighted here. And then we from what we learned from all of the outreach and engagement and the surveys and in talking to you are the additional 4 categories of local jurisdiction support, affordable housing, transit partnerships, and the tribal partnership. And I'll dig into the details of this on each slide. So starting with local jurisdiction support. So the funding that we're assigning out of the 43 million, the largest share of that, we do see going towards supporting the local jurisdictions. And so that's 19 million. A lot of that will be through the a HAP Cycle 2 Call for Projects grants. And I'll talk a little bit about the eligibility of that after I go through these proposed uses. We're proposing that 12 million of it would be for capital projects and then 4 million for planning. And the reason we have the split in that is that when we did the REAP 1.0, we had allocated 3 million towards planning dollars for HAP, and we'd also made 3 million of our Smart Growth Incentive Program available. So at this point, we'd like to really see an emphasis on capital projects, and the state also really wants to see an emphasis on infrastructure projects and capital through this funding program. The other aspect that we're looking to support and continue is some of the technical assistance that we can offer as SANDAG to local jurisdiction, and then looking at additional opportunities to provide more policy and planning tools and resources. For affordable housing programs, we have a little over 15 million that we're proposing. 13 of that we're also looking to suballocate into a regional housing trust. We're working with the San Diego Foundation to being able to do that. And really, I think the exciting thing around this funding is that we're looking at how can we take our funding and really maximize that and leverage it with other funding that's out there and it's available, so that we can make sure that we are providing more than what our 13 million could really do and stretching those dollars to be able to support more housing throughout the region. We've also, one of the things we heard when we were doing a lot of our outreach and engagement is that there's a big need for really supporting home buyer programs and the education around that. So we've set aside some of the funds to support that. And then grant writing assistance to bring more funding into the region, such as the ASIC program. And then just continuing to explore how we can do more opportunities for bringing funding into the region through housing finance authorities or other creative mechanisms that allow us to have a streamlined flow of revenues to the region to support housing. We've also been working with our tribal agencies, our tribal governments here within our San Diego County region, and so we've proposed to set aside $1.5 million to support their planning and capital projects that they may want to use to accelerate some of the housing that they want to do on site in any of the lands that they own. So we're really looking to set aside some of that funding to support what they're, I'm sorry, I read this as tribal, this says transit partnership. The transit partnership, we have also put aside $1.5 million, and this is to support some of the more TOD focused work that they're doing and advancing some of the work in and around mobility hubs and within our transit stations. But the same for tribal partnerships, we are looking at $1.7 million, and we've been having quite a lot of conversations, and maybe that's why it was front of my mind, and I saw T and just thought tribal, because I've had multiple meetings with them throughout this week and really trying to make sure that we're helping them to accelerate all of the housing programs that they're doing. They have a lot of need in wanting to be able to provide more homes on site, and some of the challenges that they're facing is just really trying to understand how do they unlock that land for development. And so they have need for doing some of those initial planning studies to be able to have more homes offered on the reservations. Okay. So one other thing that I'll just quickly mention, and I think then after that I transition over to talking about the criteria, is that in addition to SANDAG's $43 million, there are 2 other pots of funding that are available statewide. The tribes do have a set aside of $7.5 million that they're able to apply for independently, and we're working with them to apply for that funding in addition to the 1.7 that we're setting aside from our 43 million. But then there's also a competitive funding of $30 million that is available to entities such as SANDAG, but also our local jurisdictions and the tribes to apply for that, and it's a statewide competition. And you can see that the minimum and maximum amounts for the tribes are a minimum of $100,000 up to $5 million. And then for the higher impact transformative is a minimum of $5 million up to $15 million for people to apply for that. All of the application deadlines for these 2 competitive pots, as well as for SANDAGs, are all due on December 31st, and they all have the same expenditure deadline. I don't know what I'm pointing this at, but. Okay, there we go. Now it's working. Okay, so now that I've talked to you about what we're intending to do with all of the funds, I want to specifically talk now about the HAP Cycle 2 call for projects. This is the money that would be open to local jurisdictions. Stacy Cooper had been here, I think, at our last meeting and talked through our initial ideas on the criteria and, got some of your feedback. And this is also something we wanted to, this has already gone to the board, but we wanted to make sure that it was clear to you what was included in that package. So first thing is just about general eligibility for this, and we did have conversations with the state on talking about how we meet the program objectives, and we're fulfilling that within the eligibility. We had originally, I think, proposed what you're seeing here from the mobility hubs perspective and the transit priority areas using the 2035 TPAs. But one thing that we did add, and that's a little bit different from the last time it came before you, is that we're looking at TAZs that are basically low VMT areas, and we've tiered what those VMT areas can be from the 85 to 100% regional mean, 50 to 85, or less than a 50% regional mean. And so you can see those areas highlighted in green and blue on the screen here. And so that's one particular change that we did with it from the last time that we came and spoke to you. The rest of this here on this slide about the general eligibility, it's generally the same thing. We had a little bit of different language in how we might have been framing it, but it's meeting those 2.0 program objectives. The state asked us to just explicitly call it what they are calling it, which is basically AFFH, reducing VMT and accelerating infill development that facilitates housing supply, choice, and affordability. So we have changed the general eligibility to be consistent with what the state is requiring and what they asked for us to do. The other requirement that is still there is the commitment for development to our anticipated completion within 5 years of that expenditure deadline, which again, as a reminder, is June of 2026. So just some examples here for eligible uses, and this is certainly not exclusive list, or you can come up with a lot of other ideas, but for planning types of projects, if you're looking to increase housing supply, choice, or affordability, and you're looking at needing funds to do things such as rezoning or updating some of your planning documents or zoning ordinances, that's a good opportunity to use some of these funds. If you have other type of infrastructure plans that support housing development, that's also a good use of the funds. And then there are the ability, because one of the program goals is for reducing VMT. So if you're looking to develop any type of ped or bike infrastructure plans that really are focused on non-motorized transportation and that can reduce VMT but are supporting housing, those are the type of planning mobility projects that you could put forward. And then similar, here's just a very short list of what you could consider doing for some of the capital ones. And something I think we've heard from interest, maybe not necessarily from all of this group here, but we've heard from some of the outside participants that we've been talking to, is upgrading infrastructure related to sewer, water, or dry utilities so that those lands can be unlocked for development. And so if there's an opportunity for capital projects to be submitted for that, that's an open opportunity. So I encourage you to think about talking with your public works directors about projects that maybe need funding to support that. And then there can also be things, again, from those first last mile programs that you're trying to do from transit improvements or some of the active transportation that is needed to support housing. Okay, so in terms of the criteria, I won't go over this much, but this is just what it looks like. As I mentioned, we did make an edit to the first one here, where it's now no longer just a mobility hub and TPA, but it also includes the low VMT areas. And then we just changed some of the language to be very explicitly, the same as how the state has listed it, from infill development, VMT, and AFFH. And then just needing a commitment to expend the grant funds by December 31st of 2025, because the legislation had that the funding deadline is also the exact same date as the reporting, and some of the reporting requirements are pretty intense. We needed to back this up a little bit so that we can make sure that we get all of the information we need from each of you who are awarded funds to be able to show that to the state by that required date of June 2026. This criteria did not change. So in terms of, other than the naming, the points pretty much are still the same here. So don't have much to show you in terms of changing on this one, but I did want to point out for the capital that we did make a couple changes to the capital. I think previously when Stacy came and presented this, it was a total of 140 points. It's now up to 200 points. The changes that we made is that the first 3 categories, upon consultation with the state, we made those equal in weight. So it's 30 points each. So we added 10 points to the reducing VMT and the AFFH one. And then we also added a additional 5 points to the matching funds as well as to the project readiness. Now the matching funds, I believe, is not a requirement, but it's just the point allocation has changed. Okay, and that concludes my presentation.
I'm sure we have quite a few questions and comments on that one. So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and I'm happy to call on you. Or maybe we've talked about it enough and there aren't any questions and comments. Yes, Lynette, I can always count on you.
Yes, you can. Thank you. For clarification for the tribal governments, if VMT, low VMT or mobility hub is criteria, how is that being handled since a majority of those are outside of those identified areas?
So for the local jurisdictional pot where we develop the criteria for that one, that is only a pot that's eligible for the 19 jurisdictions. So they're actually not competing in that one. They are part of the 1.7 million set aside. And so the state has allowed for a different definition of infill for the tribes. Now, they're not allowed to do any projects. They're still, overall, it can't be roadway projects or projects that are, increasing VMT. So despite, the nature of their location, those are not the kind of projects the program will support, but they have a different set of criteria, and it's a completely different application for the tribes.
Do you have what that definition of infill is?
I don't have it on hand. I can provide to you what they have in the application that's posted online, but I think that the state is also open to working with the tribal nations independently on the unique needs, and especially because our tribal nations look so significantly different across the state, they're more open to working with the tribal nations independent and separate.
Great to hear. The other thing is, first of all, your staff is amazing. So I just want to say that. I'm sorry they're not here today for this item. The county has been working closely with your staff on the definitions, the criteria, specifically related to, being within a mobility hub, transit priority area, just the unincorporated area is a different being. And for consideration, one of the things that we have asked is that, number one, the county be included in conversations with the state. We understand that you've been working with the state to try to get some movement in that area and with no avail. So we would like to be a part of that conversation if at all possible. So we'll be reaching out to your staff to coordinate for that. But it doesn't seem that this criteria is in alignment with state legislation that is passing legislation related to urban areas and urban clusters that are outside of these identified areas. So that's one of the things that we feel needs to be reconciled, because there are large portions of the unincorporated area that meet those definitions but don't meet these definitions for funding criteria. Yeah. So just wanted to put that on record that we want to continue to have those conversations and that we'll be reaching out to staff.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and shout out to Allison and team for really working closely with you on that. I think we're going to talk with the state today to try and arrange some availability to have that meeting with you so that we can talk through that guidelines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one other thing to add to that, Lynette, is that we are also going to be putting out a call for the Smart Growth Incentive Program grants later in the year, and we do have a bit more flexibility there because that is a SANDAG Transnet funded program. So, yeah. Crystal, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the map of do you have any like GIS data layers, or we could compare to our parcels? Because it's a pretty zoomed out map for.
Yes, okay. We can provide you the layer. It's actually an online for the low VMT, and I believe we also have it for the TPAs and mobility hub, so we can do that as part of our email after the meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from members? Okay, I hope that we get applications from all of you in the coming months for the program. Tessa, are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Oh,
Yes, we do have members of the public that would like to speak. I have one in person, Blair Beekman, who will be followed by a virtual Tim Bailash. Mr. Beekman appears to not be in the room. So, Mr. Bailash, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you for that extensive report. There's so much information to consider, and the different sources of funding. Certainly will avail myself of the outreach that Sandag is offering. By your impressive command of the details, I can only imagine what your staff is like. If you could indulge me for a minute to kind of free associate, as I said, I'm trying to understand the scope of your working group, and housing is such a huge issue that you're tackling. So kudos for that. I'm just wondering how funding for affordable housing, such as subsidies or payments to different interest groups, the cities, stakeholders, differs from the kind of funding schemes that come through the legislature. And this may be a naive perspective, but are we thinking about creating alternative or duplicative types of ways of getting funds to do things because legislatures don't do them? There's a lot of the infrastructures comes up for votes to the community. Often it seems because the legislature doesn't want to be pegged with that either for the cost. So I just wanted to kind of think about that in terms of the activities going forward especially for the housing. And would like to divide up thinking funding sources, money coming in, everybody gets excited about, but how is it different in terms of what it produces, either for individuals or for the communities, as opposed to just another alternative funding scheme? And but as I say, there's so much going on here. My congratulations as you continue to do this, and thanks for listening.
Oh, that concludes the public commenters.
Okay, then we'll move on to item 4, which is a update on Sandag's climate program. So in addition to housing, the theme for today is climate. It's a pleasure to introduce Susan Friedman, who manages our climate planning program here at Sandag. She's going to talk about all of the work that we have underway to implement the climate-related projects in the 2021 regional plan. And then we'll hear from our partners at the county on the decarbonization framework. And so I hope these two items really spark some good conversation about the climate work that we're all doing and opportunities for collaboration across the region. So Susan, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks for having me. And I see a lot of familiar faces, so it's nice to be back with this working group. We thought it would be a good time to come back today because we have a brand new climate team, and we are finally this month a fully staffed team of 6 after a bit of a long time of vacancies. And so wanted to share some of the projects we're working on now, what you can expect to see in some upcoming meetings in the next several months, and ways we can be working together on this. Let's see. So I wanted to start with a climate change slide, just a general one. This graphic is out of the 2021 regional plan and the sustainable community strategy, kind of encapsulates most of what we try to cover with climate change planning, both with mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions and impacts from that. That's including EV charging infrastructure, increasing transit ridership, getting folks out of single occupancy vehicles, as well as with buildings, energy efficiency, renewable energy, reducing energy use. On the adaptation side, we're preparing for a changing climate. That's more around around sea level rise, extreme heat, wildfires, and then things we can do here locally to really mitigate that and help our communities, including cool zones, having defensible space, green infrastructure. And then bringing that together is the idea of climate resiliency. And that, I like to think about that one as generally defined as the capacity of a system. I'm using an official definition here. Capacity of a system to maintain function in the face of these stressors from mitigation and adaptation issues imposed by climate change. So that could be with addressing hazards and being able to adapt to that, maintain functionality, and so on. Something else that's not captured here, but Murtis is going to capture in the next presentation on the county's decarbonization framework work, is the carbon neutrality and moving to a decarbonized society. And that's something we're going to be looking at for the 2025 regional plan and in our work. So to highlight a couple of the continuing efforts that are near-term actions in the regional plan, one that many of you may be familiar with is called RECAP. It's the Regional Climate Action Planning Framework. And what we do with RECAP, one was producing a methodology report that provided some tools and guidance for local jurisdictions for when you're undertaking, whether it's a first climate action plan, an updated climate action plan, or also the monitoring of performance and of working on inventories. And then within the RECAP program, we also do these snapshots for local governments. And these happen about every 2 years. It does not replace the work that you're doing at your individual governments, but it provides kind of a consistent look across the region at various aspects of climate action planning. So we've conducted snapshots for the years 2016 and 2018, and we're completing snapshots right now for 2020. We're undergoing some data review for that because, as everybody knows, with the global pandemic, data on all fronts was very messed up for 2020, and we want to make sure that we're providing the best information. Within RECAP, I also just wanted to say we are planning a look ahead for how can we update the RECAP framework, whether it's this year or an upcoming year through grants, to also incorporate equity issues into it, incorporate decarbonization into it, incorporate some of the adaptation issues into this methodology for local governments. Another aspect of our continuing work, this launched in 2020, is our Climate Action Data Portal. I will say this is the one link in the entire slide deck that is still accurate since our website update, so we'll be getting you the updated links for everything else. But all of the RECAP methodologies found on this website, as well as the individual snapshots and region-wide snapshots for 2016 and 2018. This is also included on SANDAG's open data portal, and it's a means for not just local governments, but community organizers, other planners, stakeholders to access climate data from the region. And it's something that will continue to update, and we're working with the Energy Policy Initiative Center, EPIC at USD, to support us on this. In terms of projects that are underway right now that we'll be coming back to you with when we have some drafts that you can throw darts at. This first one is the Regional Resilience Roadmap. This is a near-term action to complete out of the 2021 regional plan. And what we're looking at is some regionally specific guidance and a clearinghouse to be built on climate adaptation and resilience planning for local governments and other decision makers. And we're really building all of this off of California's state adaptation planning guide. And that's what this graphic is from, with the 4 phases. So some of you might be very familiar with it, others less so, but really we want to be consistent with the state as well as work with everyone on their local planning needs. So what the roadmap is for, I did mention it's for planners and decision makers already, but we want to be able to have this help inform the work you need to get done, whether it's specific elements in your general plans, capital improvement programs, coastal program updates. We also want the roadmap to be a living document so that we can be updating this at least annually as new policies come into place, new best practices come about. We also want to identify adaptation metrics for it. and identify where, hazards, people, places, and things all interconnect in a user-friendly way. And so the first thing that's being done right now is we have a consultant on board working on a story map, which kind of will give us the simplified term of what all this means and how can we work with it. And that'll be completed this winter. So we'll be getting that out either in December or January to everyone, and would love to get everyone's feedback on that. We're also working with what we've called our RECAP task force, which is a subgroup of the sustainability and climate planners from your jurisdictions, some of which are in the room today. And we've been vetting this. We've had a couple meetings this summer and one this fall so far, and we're going to continue to meet at least quarterly with that group to inform this process before bringing things up to the Sustainable Communities Working Group. A couple other efforts that I wanted to recognize that are going to inform the resilience roadmap are a project that was completed in early 2022. It's not the best sounding acronym. It's called HATERS, but it's a implementation of adaptation and transportation resilience strategies. But what's unique is it's really 3 tools that came out of this, and it's from collaborating with a variety of groups to make it happen. An equity guidance, which we were supported by the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative, which many of you are members of, and so are we. This is to help introduce and integrate equity into adaptation planning decisions so that you can be considering needs of all community members. There's also an economic guidance, which the USD's EPIC supported us on, which helped with how do you frame economic benefit cost analysis, things like that, with when you're looking at adaptation plans and projects. And finally, there's an adaptation prioritization tool and toolkit, which our consultant Dudek supported SANDAG to get done. And that really is looking at what are some different adaptation measures that you could select from. You could choose how high or low you would weight certain priorities for your particular jurisdiction. And it just helps inform your planning processes. So we'll get updated links so that you have fresh access to all of these reports with our website update. And I did want to highlight this project too. It's fairly unique. It's called the Military Installation Resilience Project. It's actually phase 2 of the project, but SANDAG and the Navy Base Southwest bases, so Navy Base Coronado, Point Loma, and San Diego, we're all working together to look at climate resiliency issues, or really adaptation issues around the transportation facilities to get on and off base. The Navy cares about this for mission readiness. I'd say our local jurisdictions that we're also coordinating with each base care about this for, what are the impacts and what are the bases interested in doing and that we need to plan for. And we're looking at it from those transportation corridor perspective. So on the map, it highlights the bases, but we're focusing on 3 corridors: Pacific Highway, North Harbor Drive, and State Route 75 and 282. And looking at, initially it was looking at kind of hard engineered ways to plan for sea level rise, which, we got vetoed fairly quickly. That was the first way the engineers started this. So we've retooled this really to look at nature-based solutions for adaptation and to what we're calling is operationalizing a data framework, a data sharing between SANDAG and the Navy, which we expect to also be able to incorporate with the local jurisdictions as a way to identify when is there a reporting mechanism for flooding activities that happen. And maybe once you hit a certain amount of flooding or a certain number of times, a certain height, things like that, that would trigger taking actions, whether it's by the local jurisdiction, SANDAG, Caltrans, and such. So it's been very difficult to have data sharing usually between the military and SANDAG, and we're feeling fairly positive that we're going to get this off the ground and are really excited about the work. So this is a bit more project specific, and this is also going to inform the wider resilience roadmap and kind of that clearinghouse of what best practices can be that local jurisdictions can take advantage of. A couple other things that'll happen with this is we're going to look at mitigation measures as well for the Navy, and that's focusing on TDM for the Navy bases, transportation demand management. got to watch my acronyms, as well as developing these adaptation roadmaps for those 3 specific routes with identifying what actions, adaptation impacts are happening, what triggers could create a need for a local jurisdiction or the Navy or SANDAG to take action. So it's fairly unique. It's something that we're hoping to complete in February. I'll say February, March compared to what I wrote on there. We're happy to bring more information to you. This will be going through our military working group generally, but we'd love to see how this informs this process as well. In terms of some of the next steps that we're going to be doing, we're going to be continuing our recap meetings. That's your sustainability and climate staff members to meet with to develop these project areas. We're actually inviting in the recap stakeholders in December to our military infrastructure resilience project to also get that wider feedback from planners working on adaptation issues. Something I haven't mentioned yet, and if folks aren't familiar with these, we can put this out in an email after the meeting, but we're exploring some climate planning grants. There's some opportunities from Caltrans as well as from OPR's ICARP, and that is, let's see, Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program. But they're both providing planning dollars for adaptation planning and the traditional sustainable communities planning. They have their draft guidelines have been out this fall. They're planning to release their guidelines both in January, the final ones in January, to have Caltrans is going to give you typically a 2-month window to apply. OPR is saying that they're going to have a 3-month window, but none of that's finalized, so need to be checking those sites. I do want to say, though, that the Caltrans adaptation planning grants, they have $50 million of funding for adaptation planning this year. So it's something to look closely at. And then we'll be coming back to you with updates on the climate resilience roadmap this spring, as well as if there's opportunities with updating our recap and any other climate issues that may be of greater importance to this group that you'd like to hear more about. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and nice to see everyone.
All right, thank you, Susan. And as Susan said earlier in the presentation, she just recently hired staff, so she's been almost single-handedly with just a couple of staff members keeping all of these items going over the last year, so quite impressive. Are there any questions or comments from members of the working group? Yes, Crystal.
Thanks, Susan. That was really helpful, and especially because I've missed the last couple recap meetings, so it's a good update for me. I've heard that there's the drafts of the snapshots are coming out soon, and that we'll have an opportunity to look at the graphs and review them, and especially kind of the 2020 data I've heard has kind of been a bit of a challenge. So will we have a chance as jurisdictions to kind of give feedback on those drafts before they're final?
Yes, and I'm sorry you missed the last meeting because we did, with lots of caveats all over it, show some different graphic IDs, but typically in past snapshots, there's been a local jurisdiction by jurisdiction VMT data shown, but due to the pandemic, we know that the models do not show, which we typically used, are not showing what really happened for 2020. And so we do have observed, just on the highways, observed data for VMT for 2019, 20, and 21. So we're showing kind of the region-wide at the top of it. But yeah, you will be able to add, offer more feedback to that. We're gonna go through a one more QA/QC process internally first and then get that back out. But it's gonna be a little different so that we make it front and clear. I shouldn't say don't count on. It's likely that local jurisdictions going forward, we're going to need to get more observed data on roads. Just not that I'm expecting another pandemic, but that would really help out with the forecasted data that we use, because no one could forecast for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for the update.
Any other comments or questions for Susan? Well, more grants coming down from the state for climate, so another opportunity for local jurisdictions. Do we have any comments from the public, clerk?
Thank you, Chair. I do have one in-person public commenter, Blair Beekman.
I'm a bit behind. What item is this about again? Number 3?
This is item number 4,
We're at 4.
4 is on.
the Sandag Climate Program update.
I do not have public comment for this. I do have public comment that I'm really interested to hear, that I think you guys may have an interesting philosophy how to talk about climate change issues. Here in San Diego, your previous Sandag meeting had a interesting conversation. That's kind of why I'm here, just to kind of check out how you guys talk about climate. It may be interesting. Thank you.
That concludes the public comments.
All right, well, now we're having a non-Sandag presentation, and I would like to invite Murtaza on up to talk about the San Diego Regional Decarbonization Framework.
Have been providing valuable input into this project. We started this journey about a year ago, and here we are. We're looking for board approval in roughly spring of next year, and really appreciate all your feedback so that we can work together to develop something substantial as a region. So my name is Murtaza Baksamusa. I'm the program manager for regional sustainability at the County of San Diego. And just you all don't need a background here. Just this summer itself, there were headlines in the paper, and all of our policymakers see these headlines. They react to it. They want something done, from whether it be public safety budget to public health impacts, to just things like jobs in the economy or insurance for properties in terms of the damage. So climate change effects are everywhere. They're getting worse and they're getting more frequent. So what do we do as municipalities, as a region, as agencies? The journey we started out with was last year. We had the School of Global Policy and Strategies at UCSD convene a set of researchers, experts across different sectors around the country to provide a science-based framework for how do we get to net zero emissions by mid-century or sooner. Now that's going to be state law, but when we started this journey, it was just an executive order. We wanted to align with state goals so that we're consistent in vocabulary and anticipating that there will be programs, policies, funding that comes from the state that we can tap into and be advantageous as a region. So that is the kind of technical framework. We grew more than the technical framework as this project proceeded. Initially, it was a study. We have it posted on our website. The study is complete. It's about 550 pages. Many of you have provided feedback, including Sandag. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Allison. So many of you participated. And it's very, very, have been very generous with your time in supporting this effort in the different sectors we looked at. So that was a technical report. But we also, our board wanted us to pair the climate-related policies with workforce development policies, not just for the current workforce, but also jobs of the future. So we looked at different time scales, end of this decade, and then beyond until 2050, because we think that beyond 2030, the structure of the economy will change, but during this time of stability and transition, this is the decade for action, that we want to make sure that the current workforce is taken care of and the good jobs remain good jobs and we create many more. So that was the intent of the workforce development study. It was led by Dr. Carol Zabin, who essentially coined the term green jobs, and Bethany Jones, who is now the job czar for the Department of Energy. So we have that framework done, and now we're proceeding into implementation. Our board wanted us to see what we can do for acting, not just studying on climate-related activities. And so we are in the process of drafting and implementation playbook. I'll talk a little bit more about it in this after this slide. So this is the timeline that goes through spring, as I mentioned, for board adoption of the framework. We just concluded what we call special topic working groups. There were 5 different topics, each of the emissions sector, and we tapped into the resource base that we have in our region to figure out how we can work collaboratively. We intend to release the draft playbook in a couple months, and as agriculture and food systems report as well. But most importantly, we want to get feedback on what we can do collectively as a region and take them for board adoption. The implementation playbook is a resource. It's not a mandate. We're looking at actions at different levels, looking at starting from activities from the climate action plan, building up on them, including those in the private sector and agencies that can be utilized by individuals, businesses, organizations, as well as on a regional level. And then making it accessible and elevating those that we can work on collectively so that we get both efficiencies in how we work on it, but also attract resources. Right now, it's organized at 3 levels. The implementation playbook, it'll be at a organizational level in terms of operations, which includes municipal facilities such as what the county has, what the cities have across the region. Communities, which is more like a climate action plan or a city or a community level, and then finally regionally. I'll touch on it a little bit later. Here are some examples of what activities that would go into each of these key sectors. We added a 5th sector, so buildings, electricity, land use and natural climate solutions, and transportation were the key emitting sectors. We added the 5th sector, food systems and circular economy, because there's a base there in agriculture, but also the idea of waste itself needs to be addressed, as in what is a waste could be a resource. So it's looking from life cycle emissions of products, where they come in, how we use them and how we dispose of them. This slide shows the overall structure of the project, which I think it's kind of important here to kind of emphasize what we as a county are offering is we have the frameworks, the technical studies, but we want to understand and work with different jurisdictions on where can we arrive at regional actions. And then we also possibly will seek board direction on whether there needs to be a greenhouse gas emissions analysis or regional climate action plan. This gives you a few examples of potential regional actions we could have, such as solar energy for low-income renters that could cross across jurisdictional boundaries. Emissions know no boundaries. Many of these programs do not end with a jurisdiction, and if we combine our resources, even if it's at a sub-regional level, we may be able to attract more projects and funding. A model building code for electrification or regional program for suitable tree planting locations. And that is my contact. We just want to acknowledge my team that worked on it. Rebecca and Elise, we're forming a new Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice at the county that will be both, it'll be regional in nature as well as looking inward at the county. So our goal is to expand the work that the county is doing and interface with on a regional level on sustainability and environmental justice. With that, I'm here for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a great presentation and a really exciting project. So any questions or comments from the working group members? Go ahead.
So thank you very much for your presentation. For the record, Jeff Murphy, Carlsbad. So just, could you elaborate a little bit more as to what the end objective is with the plan? Once you go to the Board of Supervisors with the plan, what is the kind of expectations? What's the end game for, particularly with the other cities? What are you looking for? You said this isn't a mandate, but just looking at some of your flow charts, you're looking at a regional climate action plan. So can you elaborate a little bit more what that means?
Correct. So Jeff, thank you for that. Was in Carlsbad just last month with the city council, and I think, it was really great. The discussion preceded me was about procurement of EV vehicles, and it's a very good discussion because we're all having that. Many of our municipalities are thinking, well, how are we transitioning to EV? What is the EV charging infrastructure, even if it's for our own fleets? So the intent of this kind of a collaborative effort, we want to go to our board and your the policymakers across the region in the end will have to decide what is it that they want us to collectively work on. For when I said this is not a mandate, it was in the specific context of the implementation playbook, which is essentially a resource guide that any jurisdiction that wants can pick it up and use it, including it's not a mandate to the county either. So therefore, all being a resource allows policymakers to consistently make decisions so that we're all aligned in that kind of space. So it's not a mandate in the sense there is no either authority of the county to have that kind of where it's land use and climate action, which is the authority of each individual jurisdiction. And it's also a collaborative approach to provide a resource so that we can be consistent.
Okay, just a follow-up. So just so I'm clear, so is it more looking at how there's commonalities in how we address climate change in our individual programs and looking at collectively and maybe having that develop into a regional climate action plan? Not necessarily looking at it's, 2/3 of the cities are doing one thing and trying to encourage strongly the others to do the same.
Right. So Jeff, and when it comes to that, if we do get to that place where we actually start talking about how do we work together, we'll have to, we need to think of two things. One is the actual activity itself, where we can shape it so that the timelines and the activities match each other. And the other piece is funding, so that we can collectively apply for grants so that we can implement it. So that's kind of like the goal here, is that if we can around this table and with jurisdiction partner with each other so that we can actually have the similar vocabulary and programs that we can implement.
Yeah.
Crystal, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Martosa. This was a really helpful update. I've seen a few of them, and I really appreciate that you're really reaching out to all the cities and making sure that we're very involved in the process. I was just curious, as you move forward, especially towards the point where you start to kind of implement some of the ideas, have you considered, or is the county considering doing some sort of a working group with all of the cities to really become more regularly engaged in how we're regionally addressing climate change and climate mitigation?
Yes, thank you, Crystal. This is so with board direction, we're waiting for board direction in spring. As we get a little bit more clear about what the implementation looks like, there will need to be a more regular or permanent structure for working group or groups. And that's I think, so there is I'm here with agencies and cities, right? And we're also trying to make sure that the tribes, communities, business, labor, and the constellation of like industries are also weighing in on it, so that what we're talking about is practical and is actually kind of implemented, right? As I think I mentioned to Jeff, this is not a regulatory framework we're working under. This is more about practical implementation. So that's a to-do, and it's kind of an important one that we have a regular check-in.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Crystal. And I appreciate all your support coming and attending.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, before we take public comments on this item, I will say goodbye to you all and have you, Tueri, lead from here. Thank you very much. Good to see you all, and I'll see you next time.
Do we have any other member comments?
We do have one
We have public comments?
in-person public comment. I'm sorry, were you ready for that?
I just want to make sure we have no member comments before we go to public comments. Okay, yeah. Do we have public comments, Tessa?
Yes, one in person, Mr. Blair Beekman.
I think he said.
I'll pass for this item. Just thank you for your good work.
That concludes the public comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number 5. Thank you so much for the presentation. So item number 5 is our Housing Acceleration Program, and we have 2 of our planners who work on my team, Carrie Simmons and Paul LaFarga, who are going to talk about an update on our technical assistance program, as well as the work that we're doing on an anti-displacement strategy from a regional perspective. So I'll turn it over to Carrie and Paul.
Great. Hello again, everyone. My name is Carrie Simmons, and I'm here with Paul LaFarga. We're both regional planners on the Sustainable Communities team. And today we're going to come to the working group. We're really excited to share some updates on some new initiatives that the housing team is going to be kicking off. I'll be presenting on the first one, which is our Housing Technical Assistance Program, and then Paul will be taking it over and discussing the anti-displacement strategy. And after each presentation, we'll take some time to do discussion and questions. So let's jump into it. So before I start, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background and context on like the goals and the overarching strategy behind these initiatives. But Tueri did give you a little overview of the Housing Acceleration Program, so this will be brief. So the Housing Acceleration Program is really guided by these 5 main policy goals, and those are to produce housing for all, to preserve vulnerable housing, promote equity, inclusion, and sustainability, protect tenants, and prevent displacement. So these are kind of the overarching policies that really guide these initiatives, and the initiatives are meant to implement these policies. And so I briefly wanted to touch on REAP, which at this point you all are definitely aware of, but I wanted to let you all know that REAP 1.0 is the funding mechanism behind the initiatives that we'll be discussing today. And I also wanted to take this time to announce that the REAP 1.0 expenditure deadline has been extended to December 2024. And so that includes these initiatives that we're talking about today, but also for those of you who have the HAP Cycle 1 grants, the expenditure deadline has now also been extended to December 2024. And then on another note on that, I wanted to announce that in April of 2023 and 2024, we are required to provide some progress on all of the HAP Cycle 1 grant projects, as well as our initiatives back to the state. So we're really excited to be checking in with all of you to see all the good work you've made on those projects and to really showcase the good work going on in the San Diego region. So in order to develop some of the initiatives that we're going to be talking about today, and really the HAP strategy as a whole, we did some needs assessment back in 2021 by conducting interviews and really doing best practice research to understand what are some of the needs that our local jurisdictions need to produce housing. specifically for the TA program more so. And really based on all these kind of big themes that we heard that are up here on the screen, we kind of came up with 3 different categories of support under REAP 1.0. And Tuere already kind of mentioned some of these 3 categories, but I want to highlight that the initiative I'll be talking about today, the technical assistant work, falls under the local jurisdiction support. And what Paul will be discussing is the anti-displacement strategy, which is there under the regional initiatives. And I'll mention that last time you heard the housing policy and planning tool, which Sam had mentioned. And so we're really excited to really be jumping into these activities to support you all. Okay, so I'm now gonna present on the TA program, which we're really excited to get kicked off. And over the next few slides, I'm gonna kind of dive into what exactly you can expect from this program and how we really would love to get your outreach or you get your support and to really shape what this program looks like. So to begin, really the goal of the technical assistance program is pretty simple, and that is to provide all of you with the tools and resources that you need to expedite and simplify the process of getting housing projects permitted, built, and ready for occupancy, all while promoting regional coordination around housing in San Diego. And based on the challenges that we heard in our needs assessment, we've pretty much come up with these 3 main areas that our technical assistance program really aims to address. And that's to support you all implementing your housing elements, preparing for and implementing new housing legislation, and then streamlining CEQA and permitting processes for local housing development. So the focus of our TA work is really going to aim to address these kind of 3 topic areas. And so how will our TA program do this? Well, we've kind of come up with 4 main categories of support. And so, the first is trainings and webinars, and then we're going to be creating templates and toolkits. We're going to have legislations tracking, and then we're going to have local staffing assistance to support each of you guys. And I just want to say that throughout this whole process over the next 2 years, it's really going to bank on a lot of outreach to you all and getting input to shape this program to best fit all of your needs. That's kind of the whole point of all of this. So I'm now going to kind of dive into what you can expect from each one of these types of technical assistance. So the trainings and webinars, these will look like 6 half-day training sessions in the form of interactive workshops or webinars. The trainings are going to be geared toward the local jurisdiction staff, and we're going to cover a ton of different topics relating to housing policy and planning, and some of these are up here on the screen. Although these trainings are intended for member agency staff, we also want to have them, be able to further educate other audiences, such as public or planning commissioners, elected officials, members of the public, just kind of really start this conversation and transparency to educate people on kind of these very technical housing topics. The next kind of TA you could expect from this program is templates and toolkits. Templates can look like things like sample ordinances, checklists, fact sheets, draft presentations, and some sample public outreach materials. Some possible topics that these might cover are on the right hand of the slide. These templates are really meant to be able to be customized for all the communities in San Diego, all while aligning still with our regional, state, and federal goals. And then toolkits are a little distinct from the templates. We envision these to be a more robust set of packages. They're going to be longer documents, address more complex issues such as objective design standards, AFFH, and really the possibilities are kind of endless, just whatever you guys are really looking for and are a challenge. Okay, so the next part of the TA program that I'll mention is legislation tracking and interpretation. And so this part of the program is really about interpreting and tracking current and future California state housing laws and financing programs. And it's really about providing our staff with guidance so that we can pass this information down to you all. We're gonna have help from our expert consultant team and just really get an understanding of how some of these new laws are gonna affect the San Diego region so that we can prepare all of you guys and be a resource to all of you for these new laws. And the final part of the TA program that I want to mention, which we are very excited about, is the local staffing assistance program. And what this is going to be is a no-cost, on-demand consultant staffing services for all of you guys. The range of topics that the consultants can support you on is very kind of broad in nature and open-ended, but generally it's supposed to support with your housing needs. We're really excited for this part of the program because we want it to be very simple, a very easy process. You guys can just get consultant expert support on some of these topics. and really want it to be something that you all can take advantage of. And so we are going to be sure to be tracking the staffing assistance to make sure it's equal and fair among the jurisdictions. But I think this is going to be a really cool opportunity to everyone to get a lot of needed support. And the final part that I will mention is a big portion of this entire TA program is going to be having outreach with you all. You know, it's really the backbone of this whole program to be able to serve all of you guys and your staff. So we want to provide a lot of opportunity to hear your input. I'll start off with in January is when we're going to really kick this off, and we'll have a local jurisdiction kickoff meeting with all of the member agencies. We really want to hear about your challenges and really tailor all the topics and the types of materials we're making to all of you. We're going to have a questionnaire at that meeting and just really dive into what exactly can we produce out of this program. And also throughout the next year or two, we are going to be holding sub-regional meetings. These are going to occur like quarterly, and they're going to include the kind of breakdowns will be at the sub-regional level. We'll have the South Bay, the North County Coastal, North County Inland, and East County. The idea of this is to really be able to check in with all of you, make sure the TA program is still in line with your needs, but also really be a place for regional collaboration where you can bring housing challenges to each other and really, you know, get to kind of network and try to problem solve together and just have that space for communication. These also could be the avenue where we deliver some of the trainings and webinars. So I then want to provide you with some of the next steps that you can expect. We're still in the process of getting our consultant on board, which should be very soon, but pretty much now until the end of the year, we're going to be confirming our local staff contacts. Right now we have a list of housing contacts that we'll be using, but we definitely want to make sure we have everybody in the correct people in the room to inform the TA program. And then in January, we're going to have our kickoff meeting, which is going to be really exciting. From then on, that'll pretty much help us set the priorities for the TA program and, like I said, the topics and the different materials that we'll be producing. Following that, we're going to start scheduling our sub-regional meetings out and figuring out what we're going to, be discussing in those meetings and the topics of those. And then from 2023 and beyond, it'll really be about developing these materials, checking in with all of you guys to make sure they're still in line, and building out the TA program. And so with that, I just want to reiterate that the goal is really to create materials and create a place for us to really support you in both regional collaboration and, getting consultants on board and really producing these materials. So we really want to hear from you, like, are we on the right track? If something's missing, what other kind of TA materials you might need, what format, and then again, what the best way to get all of this is to you guys. And so before we jump into Paul's presentation, I just kind of wanted to open the floor up if you have any immediate feedback or suggestions or anything you might specifically want to see in this program. You also can definitely send me an email. We can set up time to chat and just kind of dive into this a little more if there's expectations that you want to see. But we're really excited to get this going. And yeah, my contact will be at the end of presentation. So that concludes it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tyler. I think we do have a couple of comments.
Great.
Thanks. This sounds really great, and I can't wait to use it. One of the items there you mentioned was Coastal Act compliance. That could vary greatly in the interpretation from different cities, and then what does the Coastal Commission view versus jurisdictions? Would the consultant have, is it intended that the consultant would have some experience in different jurisdictions and in dealing with the Coastal Commission?
Yeah, so the consultant we're bringing on board, that was a requirement when we were kind of looking into the scope of deciding on them. And the firm has folks here that are local to San Diego. And so that's definitely going to be consideration. And when we meet with them, we can definitely touch on all of those kind of things. Yeah, for sure.
I think Lynette, you had a comment, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Thank you for the presentation. It is exciting. Can you go to the slide where you were speaking of the on-demand consulting services and the list? So you have upzoning and rezoning and infill development. So what type of consulting would they, if we have opportunities for upzoning, would they assess those? Would it be somewhat like a peer review, or what? how do you see them assisting?
It really could be anything. We kind of just have like a set amount of hours that they're going to be able to be assigned to each jurisdiction pretty much. And so it really can be so open-ended. Whatever you pretty much need, we're probably, going to kind of figure out the exact kind of how things are going to be set up. But really the idea is very simple, very easy, whatever you really need them to do. So,
Great,
yeah.
thank you.
And just on kind of expanding on that question, so it sounded like we can utilize or potentially utilize this consultant for either general guidance to all the way down to providing specific information, help us draft policy and code. Do you have an idea about how many hours each jurisdiction is going to be given so we can plan accordingly? And can we maybe work with other cities where we can steal their time well, anyway, basically how many hours and actually when is this going to be actually available?
Sure. So in terms of when it's going to be available, once we get them on board, I think we're going to be figuring that out. I'm not exactly sure, but there's about 1,450 hours that we have right now that will be spread out between the jurisdictions. I guess we're still figuring out how that's going to be split up, if jurisdictions can work together on something. I'm not completely sure, but there will be the opportunity with the REAP 2.0 funding to continue these kind of efforts. So there's always the option, if that's something that people were really interested in with the next kind of round of funding, maybe we might put more resources towards the on-demand consultant services. So that's great to hear, and we're very excited for that as well.
Looks like we have another one. Jane?
Thank you for your presentation. And just to piggyback and further that, just to clarify, is that going to be available to all jurisdictions, or will it be a competitive process? Will everybody be eligible?
Everybody will be eligible. It won't be a competitive thing. We're just going to pretty much track it to make sure, it's roughly fair between all of the jurisdictions who want to use it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Paul?
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Paul Lafarga. I have addressed this group one time before, so I'm glad to be back. I'm here to inform you all that SANDAG has recently kicked off an anti-displacement strategy this past month. So I'll provide you with a quick overview and see if there's any questions. So it's no secret that the San Diego region is amidst a severe housing crisis right now, and that one of the worst impacts is the displacement of communities and households. And the implications of displacement can reach beyond one's home to touch employment status, access to healthcare, social systems, education. And so perhaps now more than ever, it's important that the region is equipped with a comprehensive set of strategies to address this displacement. And this project, to give a little bit of a background how it came to be, it was prompted through community engagement activities of the 2021 regional plan. SANDAG's Social Equity Working Group, along with other advocacy groups, emphasize the importance of considering displacement. And as SANDAG is responsible for large infrastructure projects, we should understand impacts of these projects to mobility and land use, and also provide policy resources and other strategies to address the displacement. Appendix B of the 2021 regional plan is where this strategy is identified as a near-term action to accelerate affordable and equitable housing production. And as Carrie just mentioned, this is part of SANDAG's HAP strategy. So the project goals, we want to use quantitative and qualitative data to understand where and to what extent the residential displacement of low-income households is occurring. And beyond that, we also want to look at which of these areas that are facing displacement pressures are also targeted for infrastructure investment as part of the 2021 plan. So as part of that, we want to craft region-wide and locality-specific solutions and tools for preventing displacement, and equips the jurisdictions with these so that they are empowered to further develop and implement their own displacement policies, anti-displacement policies. And throughout the whole process, we want to engage with the key stakeholders. This group is considered one of the stakeholders for this project to understand more about the local pressures and vet the validity of materials that are created as part of this strategy. So here's the project team. We're really excited to have Lissar Development Consultants as our main consultant. We'll also be working with the Urban Displacement Project and the Global Policy Leadership Academy. and then I'll be serving as a project manager. So there'll be a few project deliverables. One is a best practices research, one's an existing conditions assessment, and that all builds up to create the anti-displacement toolkit. I'll just give a brief overview of each of the deliverables. So one is the existing conditions assessment, and it'll answer questions such as where and to what extent is displacement occurring, and where might it occur in the future as well. The project team will specifically be looking at the displacement risk for populations earning between 50 and 80% of the area median income, and also those earning less than 50% of the AMI. The strategy will use the Urban Displacement Project's estimated risk displacement model, which is a nationally recognized standard for understanding displacement risk. The model brings attention to areas that have characteristics that are shown to predict renter displacement in California. We'll also include forced eviction data, and work on this has already begun, and it should be done by early winter 2023. Another component is the best practice research, and the best practice research is going to be conducted by LaSAR, and they'll do research on anti-displacement housing strategies, and they'll summarize their findings in a report. They'll look at case studies, targeted discussions, plans, programs, and legislation, things that aren't significantly examined in existing literature. Work on this has already begun, and it's set to be complete in early winter 2023 as well. And so that all builds into the anti-displacement toolkit. So it'll contain tools and resources that provide locally oriented guidance for implementing anti-displacement policies. We understand the region's very different, so we'll have different solutions for the different areas. It's going to be conformed by the prior work, and we're going to tailor it specific to the needs and conditions, and maybe have a few options where if you implement this tool and this tool, this might be the impact, and kind of looking at that in a scenario planning type of mindset. And so that will begin in the spring of next year, and that will run through January 2024, which is when the project is set to conclude. Stakeholder engagement is a big part of this project. GPLA and LaSAR will take the lead in stakeholder engagement. They'll provide periodic updates and consider feedback. You all will have the opportunity to meet them as well in the future. And so the feedback will be incorporated into the final deliverables, and you'll see the draft deliverables before then too. And Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Do we have any other comments or questions? Yes, Joseph.
So you're just focusing on the low and very low income as far as it relates to the displacement of those individuals in those income categories?
Yes, we're looking at 50 and 80%, and then below 50 as well.
Well, I think it's short-sighted, at least for our jurisdiction. We have, what we have is affordable. It may not fall in that category, but affordable to those individuals. And we can, if we do see a much of the housing development that we're hoping to have as a part of our housing element, it's likely to, displace a number of people that might fall in that moderate category and force them to go to other areas. Personally, I would like to see something as it relates to going beyond just that low income category. And then any costs associated, is that going to be part of this analysis too, of displacing those individuals? Or if you implement those strategies, what the costs are to the project, might be?
It will include different tools or different policies that could be enacted, and then it might show what the impact of using one of these tools or two of these tools or all three of them together, to kind of show that it might not be a one-fit-all solution, and that it's going to take a myriad of different policies to get there.
If I may, that also, because I see if we implement some of these strategies, we're likely to be adding costs to the project. And they may ask for more subsidies, et cetera, in order to make that work, of which many of us don't have funds to contribute it because we no longer have affordable housing, so funds available.
Yeah, it's a good comment, something we can consider and take back to the consultant. Were there other comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you, Joseph. And just for the record, because Tessa let me know, I mentioned that this was item number 5, but this was item number 6. So Tessa, do we have any public comments on this one?
Yes, for item number 6, we have 2 public commenters, one in person, Blair Beekman, will be followed by a virtual commenter, Tim Bailash.
Hi, thank you, Blair Beekman. Well, thanks a lot for this item. You had a few items on housing today, and one of the speakers I'd seen at a previous meeting here. I've heard some of a previous meeting on climate work and some of your work now on housing, and just a real good luck to yourselves. In being from the San Francisco Bay Area, low income or extremely low, very low and extremely low income housing is very important to myself. And you know, there were some interesting new ideas. MTC is the major group up there, the Metropolitan Transit Commission. And that's the major agency that housing works through for the Bay Area. And they've come up with some interesting ideas. And one of their philosophies is how to develop an infrastructure planning that works and is more versatile on the local level compared to the past, and how they work with Sacramento. You've had some interesting run-ins right now with the current governor, who's really questioning the future of housing, and that we have all this new COVID funding money that's possible to us, yet we don't know quite how to organize ourselves well enough to be putting that money to good use. A real good luck how to do that. I think we all have a really good heart, and we know what our good practices can be. And we're just learning to really sit down to, we just have a ton of new money available that we haven't had before. And that from that, we should be able to start to talk about how subsidy use can be better utilized to help people to you know, where they used to be housed for, you know, 1 month to 2 years, or 1 year to 2 years. Now they can be housed for 2 to 5 years. And we're trying to learn to get a grip on that, how to understand those sort of concepts. Good luck how to organize ourselves to be thinking more in that way, and that it can be okay to talk about publicly and openly. And with that said, what I mentioned before here is the idea, and that I say all the time in the Bay Area, the ideas of a mixed income housing. It's a practice that's been it's being introduced to kind of the major cities of the Bay Area over the past few years, but yet, I mean, over the Bay Area, over the state of California, in the past few years it's been introduced, but in the Bay Area it was not. And I kind of had a role to kind of like just be a cheerleader for it and described it as a really good purpose, and how very low and extremely low income can be placed within low and moderate income housing, and it can all be in the same building, and it can all be in the same neighborhood. And those are new concepts to ourselves. I mean, we understand it in our minds, but we just don't have it written down in front of us so where we can see we can be doing that. We can be doing that now, and I think it offers an amazing flexibility and choices about how we can be working in our future that I hope it'll be considered with these items, and it's safe to talk about. It can be, I hope it can be a safe subject we can talk about now. And as the governor has stated, he really is looking for ways we talk about stuff now, and I think this is one of the ways to do that. We're ready to talk about it. I hope it can be a more open conversation about mixed income things, and thanks for your time.
Dr. Bailash, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you for this meeting, and I just jumped in from another meeting, so I apologize. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Timothy Bailash. I'm in Mid-County Coastal, I say, up in Del Mar, a physician, scientist, researcher for some time, and appreciate the opportunity. I don't adopt every new technology, but I do try to keep up and see, because we have such intense problems. I came across a couple of months ago an article, and I haven't had time to look into it, so please accept that I'm just mentioning it on faith, that there are manufacturers making trailers that can withstand 150-mile-per-hour winds. And that's better than some of the construction that's being put in some places. It's a different life to be in your own home, even if it's a small home, especially when you can't care for a large area, than living in a multi-story condo or apartment complex that goes up 30 stories. Some years ago in Florida, there were a couple of hurricanes that came through, and it turned out that the new housing there was not even built to code. And so I hope some attention will be paid to providing ways to make sure that the climate change aspects of housing are dealt with as well. The Katrina experience showed that in terms of the government especially, there were a lot of contracts to do things that were on paper, but they never materialized in an appropriate time frame. And I hope things are a little bit different for some of these emergencies for housing. So I would look to the organizations here and the government to provide guidance and standards that are appropriate to what is needed, which is often a matter of opinion, and not just administrative rules to jump through to get funding. I would look for a project to paper ratio, what the administrative costs are, how long it takes to develop, and how it's different from what these housing projects have been tried from many, many years ago, way before even I was born. And to look at whether the decisions are centralized or delocalized for the money flows, for control of the private versus public, and who is just helping whom. And so I'm really excited about the committee, still learning about you, appreciate the other public comments and the comments of the council. So thank you.
That concludes the public commenters.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Paul and Carrie. I'm going to suggest that we table item number 7, the broadband permitting update, into our January meeting since we're running short on time. So that way they can have proper time to give a presentation and you have the ability to ask any questions versus rushing it into all of like 5 minutes. So the next item is item number 8, which is our upcoming meetings. As Antoinette mentioned earlier in the meeting when it started, our next working group meeting is actually for January 19th. So remember to note that change despite what the screen says. So 19th, January 19th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. here back at Sandag in our boardroom. And we will have a presentation on the Series 15 land use and growth forecast and share updates with the from the Series 15 task force at that meeting, and then we'll bring back the broadband item. And then I think we're also planning on having some presentations from our environmental mitigation program and an update from Sandag's zero emission vehicles program. So it should be another full and exciting agenda, and just want to thank you all for your time. If you do have any suggestions for future topics to bring to this working group, please make sure to communicate those to Carrie or let any of our staff know so that we can agendize those items. Tessa, before we close, are there any public comments on that item?
No, there are no further public commenters.
Okay, thank you. It's 3:24 and we are adjourned.